Oppenheimer, The Courage to Build and the Strength to Regret, inspired by the book American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin. Today's episode is obsessive, intense, emotionally raw, and reverent. Today we're talking about J. Robert Oppenheimer, the man who led the Manhattan Project, the man who built the bomb, the man who, after helping end a world war, spent the rest of his life trying to reconcile what he had done. Let me start here. Quote, "In some crude sense, the physicists have known sin. That's Oppenheimer. He's not a politician, not a general, not a soldier. He's a physicist, a scientist, a philosopher, a builder, and a man who never stopped feeling the weight of what he had built, which was the first atomic bomb." This episode is based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning biography American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin. It's the definitive source on his life, and it's packed with lessons not just about science or war, but about power, integrity, and the psychological price of genius. This book took almost 25 years to write, and Kai Bird is one of the leading biographers now because Martin Sherwin has died. So Robert Oppenheimer was born in 1904 to a wealthy Jewish family in New York. He was brilliant from an early age, reading classics by 6 years old, studying physics by 12. But emotionally, he was isolated, awkward, craving attention. And in the book, it says that he was a solitary boy, his biographers write, brilliant but emotionally stunted. He longed to be seen, but could not relate to others. So one thing to note about Robert Oppenheimer is that his mom was very protective of him because he was sick all the time. He once confessed, quote, "I feel I'm just an observer of life, not a participant." This part is important because from the start, Oppenheimer is intellectual before he is emotional. He studies poetry, philosophy, quantum mechanics. He reads Sanskrit and quotes the Bhagavad Gita for fun. But inside, he's volatile, he's insecure, he's burning. He goes to Harvard, graduates early after 3 years, and then goes to Cambridge to study experimental physics. But while he's in Cambridge, he suffers a breakdown. He once poisoned an apple on his tutor's desks. Attempted murder, they almost expelled him. Why does it matter? Because from day one, he was not stable, but he was obsessed with what he did. And this is important because I think every character deserves a story, and Oppenheimer quotes that he didn't mean to murder anyone, but he did have to go to see a psychiatrist after that bout of feeling insecure about his time in Cambridge. He realizes that he's not meant for experimental physics, but his obsession with physics beats balance every single time. This is something that I even saw while reading Einstein's biography. Einstein was not good at mathematics. He actually graduated at the second bottom of his class. The very bottom person on the list was actually his wife during his time in Zurich. And he and Oppenheimer share this, that they were both obsessed with theoretical physics and quantum mechanics because they could both hear the music, if you will. Oppenheimer was obsessed with physics. He was deemed a genius at a very early age. And by 38 years old, he becomes recruited by Franklin D. Roosevelt's Secretary of State, Leslie Groves. In 1942, America needed a bomb before Hitler. They thought that Germany was ahead in creating the atomic bomb. So Leslie Groves, the Secretary of State for Franklin D. Roosevelt, finds Oppenheimer. He never led a lab, he never managed people, but General Groves saw something in him. He says this about Oppenheimer: "He's a little queer, but he's a genius, and I need a genius." Now, I need you to know that queer has changed in language. Back then, it was more of a colloquial term for weird, but now it's become something to represent the LGBTQ plus community. So I just want to differentiate that before we go on. It's also important to note that when Groves gives him onus to manage and direct the first atomic bomb, he is already a professor at UC Berkeley General Groves to go to Los Alamos, New Mexico, which is where Oppenheimer has a ranch. When he's young, his father sends him to New Mexico on a trip, and he falls in love with New Mexico. He loves horseback riding. He loves being outside in New Mexico, and his love for Los Alamos leads him to hire initially 100 scientists for the atomic bomb project, but later on, it becomes almost a population of 6,000 scientists helping create this atomic bomb. Thousands of scientists are met with a deadline, and he delivers fast. Oppenheimer built the bomb in under 3 years. That is a management miracle. Why? Because he was finally in his element. This intersection of science, philosophy, and ambition and world-shaping consequence really shaped him to do this quick. He read John Donne and quantum physics on the same day. He recited the Bhagavad Gita the moment the first bomb went off. Now I become death, the destroyer of worlds. You know what that is? That's a man who knows exactly what he's done. He's not hiding, he's not sugarcoating, he's not pretending. And it also shows someone who holds the guilt of building such a powerful weapon. He knew that he had blood on his hands. In fact, he even said that to Harry Truman after Harry Truman finds out about this project once he takes on office. It becomes public knowledge that the atomic bomb might be used or being experimented in other countries. And Truman is scared that the Soviets might get a hold of it, that the Germans might get a hold of it. And as a staunch person who is against fascism, Oppenheimer is behind this. He is wanting to help with the war. And here's what Kai Bird writes. He did not celebrate. There was no joy on his face when the bomb exploded, only awe and silence. In fact, Oppenheimer becomes really depressed after World War II because he reads exactly what happens in Hiroshima. He becomes regretful that 200,000 people died with his invention. And this is where the paradox of Oppenheimer takes place. He didn't dodge responsibility. He didn't bury regret. He was a pacifist. He was a patriot. He was a builder. He was ashamed. There were so many paradoxes. And this is where I think the fascination behind Oppenheimer is an important one. Oppenheimer was in many ways regretful of his decision after the bomb goes off in Hiroshima. And as an Asian American, I think that it's important to address the paradox that I feel being in two cultures, being Asian and also being American, not being from this country, but immigrating from this country at a young age. And it holds a lot of specialness in my heart to know that the inventor of the atomic bomb felt guilt for having invented it, for having released it into the world. Because as they were doing experiments in New Mexico, when the first test went off, there were people in New Mexico that far away, higher rates of cancer began to increase. And even as far as Nevada, people were reporting rates of cancer. Oppenheimer didn't hide behind this guilt. In fact, after 1945, he made a series of lectures in Philadelphia, for example, and across the country about the dangers of nuclear war and how America needed to control it, to watch out for it. That's not necessarily a weakness. That's a psychological strength. Most men in power simplify their story. They justify why they did it. They rewrite history to protect their egos, but not Oppenheimer. He says this, in some crude sense, the physicists have known sin, and this is a knowledge which they cannot lose. That's a direct quote. It's not rhetorical. It's not even personal. This is the psychological lesson. Greatness often requires contradiction. You must be able to hold two truths at once. What I did was necessary to end the war, and what I did was also horrifying. Most people can't handle this tension, but Oppenheimer could. That's why I respected him. He read very prolifically about the effects that he had on Hiroshima, In fact, he finds out later on, without his knowledge, that Japan was actually ready to fold in 1945 before the atomic bomb had dropped. And he held so much guilt as an individual, knowing that the atomic bomb could have been stopped. And 10 years later, he gets turned on by the US government. But before I go there, I think it's important to note that in 1945, he's on the cover of Time magazine, and he's become one of the most, quote, important scientists in the world, but he becomes depressed at that time. And he speaks out openly about the power of nuclear war and the dangers of nuclear war. And in 1954, he attends a secret security hearing, and the US government revokes his security clearance after working for the government for 12 years. So, setting the stage, it's 1954, it's the Cold War. McCarthy is purging anyone with past communist ties. And Oppenheimer had flirted with the left in the 1930s, had friends who were communist. His wife was in the party, and now they wanted him gone. He was being followed by the FBI to prove that he was a communist. But as Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin like to say, he was more pink than he was red, like super communist. He had compassion on communists, especially after the Great Depression of the 1930s. But the hearing was brutal, y'all. They humiliate him. They strip his security clearance. They try to erase him from history. But here's the kicker. This guy doesn't even fight dirty. He doesn't sell out any of his friends. He just tells the truth. He says, I have no friends to name. I have no secrets to betray. I have only my conscience. He sat there publicly humiliated and he didn't flinch. Kai Bird writes, he lost the battle for public trust, but he keeps his soul. And listen to this. This man had power. He could have burned the whole thing down, but instead, he just walked away. And I think it's because he knew the difference between reputation and integrity, and one of them always lasts longer. And if you don't know what I'm saying, integrity is oftentimes the thing that wins out over a long period of time. Despite his public humiliation and excommunication from the government, he comes out of it strong. He doesn't care about his reputation. He cares more about truth. And the fallout of this is what courage really looks like. He speaks out and he spends the rest of his life on the margins. No more classified access, no more public praise. He doesn't even whine, though. He doesn't retract his regret. He doesn't explain himself to win people back. He just continues to live quietly with dignity. And when President Lyndon Johnson finally gave him a token award in 1963, 9 years after he's been revoked of his security clearance and publicly humiliated, Oppenheimer accepted it. But even then, he never softened his position after his regret of the nuclear war. His biographers write, quote, he was a lonely man at the end, but he had made peace with what he chose to stand for. This is what psychological courage looks like. Do the thing that no one else can do. Pay the price no one else wants to pay. Live with the consequences without numbing out. Take ownership. And so this is what I've learned from Oppenheimer after reading parts of the American Prometheus. Number one, genius is a burden, and most people buckle under it. Oppenheimer almost did, but he still delivered. And then he took responsibility for the invention of the atomic bomb. That's pretty rare. Number two, integrity is lonely. You want to stand for something. Be ready to stand alone. There are going to be times when you take ownership for a mistake that you made and you feel alone because everyone makes you feel like you made a mistake by speaking out. Don't allow that to be the reality. You stand for integrity, not reputation. We stand for integrity, not reputation. Number three, psychological courage is holding guilt without disowning your power. That's what he did. He didn't hide from the bomb. He didn't hide from his conscience. He just held both. Oppenheimer once said, when you see something that is technically sweet, you go ahead and do it. That's the nature of science. But then you must ask, was it good? And can I live with what I've made? That's a dangerous question. And it's the only one that matters. So here's my closing statement. If you're building something powerful, if you're stepping into leadership, into responsibility, into legacy, ask yourself, will I be able to live with what I made? Can I tell the truth about what I've done, about what it cost, and about who I became? Oppenheimer could. Can you? My name is Helen Garcia, and thank you for listening to part 1 of Oppenheimer, the psychological courage to take ownership. If you really enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this channel or to this podcast. Share it with a friend if you think that it's going to help a friend. I have a newsletter coming out July 15th, which is 1 week from now. This episode comes out on July 11th, 2025. If you'd like access to that free newsletter resource, you can subscribe to the newsletter in the link down below. Otherwise, if you'd like to support me, you can also buy the paid subscription of the My newsletter. Those proceeds really do help me. Otherwise, new episodes come out every Friday. Stay tuned in for next week for a deeper dive into Oppenheimer. Spoiler alert, he wasn't a perfect person. So we're going to explore more into his romantic life, his life as a father, his life as a husband, and I'll stay tuned for next week.